It's good to be with you today and bring you a new GYN Garage. My name's Ed Pavlik in Lexington, Kentucky, and my colleague is,
Frank Lawton from London in the United Kingdom.
well, Frank, something went right for the United Kingdom at the Paris Olympics. You finished in the medals behind China and the U.S. You're very strong in equestrian and rowing, and I personally was in awe of Keely Hodgkinson in the 800. What's your take on the Olympics?
Absolutely. I'm not a great sports fan, but I am taken by the Olympics. And when they were in London, we were lucky enough to get a couple of seats at the Olympic Stadium. And I mean, just the absolute spectacle. And I think the fact that these people spend 4 years or even longer just to peak at this particular event, whether it's the marathon or the 100 meters or sailing or whatever it is, to actually just focus on that is incredible. And of course the other side is you focus for 4 years on it and you pipped at the post by 0.4 of a second, whatever it is, because somebody got over the line before you did or someone, whatever. The other thing that I think is quite interesting, and I think this is a bit political, it's the boxing as to whether or not these two boxers who were born or who are female but probably have a genetic abnormality that means that they have high testosterone levels. And I think certainly for something like boxing, where essentially you are being judged on whether or not you can beat somebody's head with your fists, and you've got somebody who, because they have levels of testosterone that have been high or are high, clearly that must be give them a muscular or physical advantage over people who are not like that. And I think, the Olympics has a wheelchair event, has a Paralympic event. You would not put somebody in a wheelchair playing tennis against Agassi or Andy Murray. Why not have a third event? Have a trans event. It's dead simple. And then no one would argue. If I was a non-trans sports person and found that a trans person had pipped me at the post because of some aberration of the logic of gender and sexuality, I think I'd be a bit annoyed. That's me.
Okay, well, today we're going to talk about a paper it looks at the overall survival benefits when drugs are taken that were approved on the basis of incomplete survival information. And this paper appeared in the JNCI, and essentially now we have to do is just make the consideration. Uh, the consideration really starts with a simple question: what's the overall survival findings from people in taking a drug that was approved with incomplete survival data, but there was a survival component that would go forward. Um, I think the thing we need to say is that uh, it's very hard to conduct a clinical trial, and it's very expensive. And so there are people who look for ways, or there are commercial drug companies looking for ways to simplify things and make them less expensive. Several months ago, we did look at basically what the effect of not having a random control trial with survival endpoints was on the success of drugs out there, basically in Ontario, Canada. And we found that it was important relative to an American study that basically there were studies that included overall survival that contributed to why the drug was approved. So now what we're looking at in this particular thing is to say the drugs were evaluated in terms of progression-free survival or in terms of response rates. Those seem to be favorable enough. They were put into approval with the idea that the survival performance of these drugs would be followed as they move forward. So with that in mind, really what has happened is that uh, uh, the, uh, the folks who are doing the study looked at what would be almost 250 drugs and found that 95 of those drugs were the drugs that had a survival endpoint that was that the study was waiting on. And so you can see that what happened was that of those 95 drugs, there were 39 who were continuing to be available to the public with immature survival data. In other words, only looks at progression-free survival, the effect on tumor size. And they were followed, all but one of them were followed for up to 8.2 years. And in that period of time, the lion's share of these drugs turned out to have no survival benefit. 63% of them, and only 32% of them did have a survival benefit. What this really means is that it's very important to have overall survival as a preliminary, even though it's expensive. But it also means that some people were paying a lot for nothing. And in other words, they were given a drug that they were taking to improve their survival when it didn't. Now, one of the biases in the study is the reporting bias. And curiously enough, those drugs out of what we just shown you that had no significant overall benefit after they were being taken had that news reported a lot later than those that had a survival benefit. And so if you're really cynical, you would say, wasn't it to the pharmaceutical houses' advantage to delay reporting these things? Why didn't they wait so much longer? With that being said, the reason may be differences in the way the different cancers grow and spread. Now, the last thing I want to show you has to do with the different agents that were looked at, and three of them are very important for people who are interested in gynecologic oncology. And as you can see here, they're all PARP inhibitors, and all three of them, which are probably out there being prescribed just about everywhere in the United States, do not have a demonstrated survival benefit. They had basically immature survival results. And so I boxed them off so you can see them. But basically, there's about a 5-year increment that they've been followed, and it has been determined that there's no survival benefit for these drugs. So rather than thinking that the list of drugs is fairly obscure, but rather than thinking that doesn't refer or doesn't relate to us in gynecologic oncology, that would be a mistake. So with that being said, what are the ramifications of all of this? Well, one important ramification is that maybe there's other weaknesses in how these prior to survival result type of drug proceedings go. Very much is possible for controls to cross over into the experimental group or to other therapies, but because they've been enrolled, they're counted in the experimental group. That's that happens to be a possibility. Another possibility is these findings get generalized all over the world. Basically, it's a act made by the FDA, but the FDA has great credibility internationally. And so all of a sudden we fed a series of facts that aren't necessarily true, more broad than our own country. In another cynical sense, it appears to me that maybe the prospect of generating evidence on survival by any means possible is more important than demonstrating the gains of the drug actually in terms of true survival. There wasn't, as I've mentioned to you, an outcome reporting bias that the non-significant events took much longer to be reported. And when these results tended to be reported on in journals, many times there was no data claiming a survival benefit, but what there was a claim of a survival benefit. And this sort of says that things get really mixed in a way that's not the best when you deal with promoting a drug, getting it into use, and then finding out that its use is not supported by survival data. Frank, what do you think?
Yes, I think it's the FDA and many other regulatory bodies have used progression-free interval or even response rate as surrogates for survival. I mean, let's face it, if you want a study of a relatively rare malignancy and you want to do a randomized study to show the efficacy or non-efficacy of a particular therapy, you're going to be waiting a long time to recruit the numbers or indeed to follow up to an endpoint that's measurable. So you can understand why regulatory agencies will take other things as surrogates. The other thing is that there are three factors involved in the patients, the physicians, and the regulatory bodies and the pharmaceutical companies. There are four. And you could argue that here is an exciting drug that seems to show in a phase 2 study a very, very good activity in a particular malignancy. We need to give this drug to the general population because doctors want to help patients, patients want to be helped. I think if the medical fraternity go to a patient and say this new drug will increase your chance, well, it will not cure you, but will increase your chances of survival. I think that's not an unreasonable end result. So I think if progression-free interval is something that the regulatory authorities have accepted from a pharmaceutical company as showing activity of a particular therapeutic regimen, I don't think that's unreasonable, to be honest. But I do understand that. I mean, it happens in all journals, doesn't it? The journals tend to produce data or publish data that is positive. It is very unusual to get data in medical journals that is negative. And I think that's because doctors want to read about positivity, and probably patients do as well, rather than negativity. So I don't think this is an act by the pharmaceutical agencies or pharmaceutical companies to obfuscate the data. I think the FDA and the other world regulatory authorities have accepted certain clinical endpoints. They've produced them, and then it is up to the medical profession to determine whether or not that is worthwhile. I accept that may mean that a lot of patients are given treatment that in the end is not effective, but that doesn't mean that when the patients were given the treatment, they didn't think it was effective. And I think that's doctors and patients want new treatments. They want to feel that there are advantages in what they are doing. And so I accept totally the results of this paper. And I think most people who have done any clinical studies with cytotoxic and other agents would understand the same. However, that's the way it is. That's the playing field at the moment. And in addition, of course, a lot of the drugs are in very small niche malignancies. So you're not going to be able to do huge clinical studies on patients who with a fairly rare tumor. And I think that's going to be the other problem. I agree, as you said, I agree entirely with the end results of the paper, but I think in the real world, all they've done is said, this is the best that there is in the time that we have. Pharmaceutical companies have got to make money in order to develop more patients want to have treatment. Doctors want to be able to give treatment to patients that they think has an advantage. If the advantage is a progression-free interval, that's an advantage to the patient. It may not be advantage in the term in survival, but for progression-free interval, where a patient has a completely different goal from somebody who does not have a malignancy, I think is an important endpoint and shouldn't be just said that's irrelevant. Survival isn't everything, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with you. I will take, I mean, I agree with you on virtually everything except something you didn't mention. And that's in the United States, paying for these things is very expensive. And I do know that some of the treatments with the cart are by the drug house refundable if it doesn't work. So you've paid your $1 million or $2 million, which is what those treatments cost, and it didn't work. in which case you either are not charged or your family gets a refund. So I'd raise the point that is simply a question: to what extent uh, is there a responsibility for saying, okay, we went out there and the PARP inhibitors in this country are a chronic treatment that you never get away from using them as long as you can tolerate them. But what if really what happens is this person's able to stay on it, there's no effect, and they've been on it for 2 years and spent $500,000. Finally, someone says this is not going anywhere, and the paper comes out that there is no survival benefit. Can an argument be made for the fact that that drug company really owes a refund? You know, I mean, that's the question I raise, and you know, it, especially since it could be a drug that's really hard to stay on, and the quality of life issue, comes into things. But I agree with you. There's probably no other way to do this except to have the drug out there. But there is a different way of paying for the drug out there, and that's my only difference from you.
I wonder if perhaps then that when the physician sees a particular patient, he or she has got to say, this is not going to increase your chances of survival, but it will improve your general health for a period. It will stop the progression of the disease. So it will allow you to do whatever it is that you want to do, but you're still going to die in 5 years' time or whatever, which I think is very brutal, but that's presumably the only way to get around this particular problem is to say this drug will make your tumor shrink, or it may go away for a bit, but it's going to come back again. And perhaps that's the way that particularly in the United States, if the people are paying for this saying, hang on a minute, you told me it was, I thought you told me I was going to be cured and I'm not. The doctor's got to say, well, no, I didn't actually say I was going to cure. I said that the chances of you being alive and disease-free at 3 years or whatever is this. And in that 3 years, you've done everything that you wanted to do, travel around the world, seen your children graduate from university, this, that, and the. So I think the goals are very different for a patient with cancer compared with people who don't have it. And I think if the goals are discussed with the physician, then I have no problems at all with this study. What I do have problems with, of course, is, as has been said, that if people, the regulatory authorities, the pharmaceutical industries, patients or whatever, think this drug is going to cure me when there are no data that says that, that's wrong. So we've just got to change the way that these drugs are dispensed, prescribed, used, recommended, and probably bought and sold.
I agree entirely. And I think when money gets involved, you have some big pharmaceutical houses that are doing the right thing, are doing exactly what you said, advising the physician that in fact there is not necessarily a survival benefit. But I can watch TV and see these commercials for these drugs, for their cancer drugs, and you can see that they're being pushed. The words that they say are saying that some people survived longer on this drug than they did otherwise, and you see also that basically they fall into the category of what we've been talking about today. The survival data is still immature, and
Yeah. I mean, we don't get that in the United Kingdom. There are no adverts for pharmaceutical agents in the same way that there is in the United States. But absolutely, I mean, it's the money that talks. I've been watching, and it's probably slightly irrelevant, and you may have seen it before, but Dope Sick, about the OxyContin problem in the States in the late 2000s, and you could see the pressure that patients were being put under by this fantastic, wonderful new drug that was a non-addictive opioid that would cure all of your pain. And as you say, money talks, unfortunately. And I think doctors at the time probably thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is a non-addictive 24-hour opioid, low dose. Yay, fantastic. Looks great. But of course, the data didn't actually justify that.
Exactly. Well, Frank, we've done it again. We've done another Gynec Garage.
Absolutely.
And
And a bit of politics and a bit of finance. It's all good stuff.
well, and we've done it on a day where we both have great weather. It's not raining there. It's not raining here. We're in the
Yeah, it's
80s.
very, very warm here at the moment. Very hot. Yeah.
I see. Okay, well, I'll see you in a month, Frank. You take care.
You take care, my friend. See you soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye.